All right. So I think Jeff is here, and we're gonna go. Normally, Jeff, I guess, will be here when he can be here, but it's not to be expected. So, I need to put my headphones on so I can hear Jeff. Hey, yeah, now I can hear Jeff. Great. So a little bit of technical difficulties last week. I dropped as I was starting to begin to talk about the Bronze and Iron Age. Oh, why are they not hearing you? Yeah, I gotcha. Go ahead and talk now, Jeff. No. I know what the problem is. Try now. You're not popping up on my OBS audio. I'm just fiddling with it. Have it go now? No. Yeah, just keep talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. We got you.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a little bit. So I dropped. If you can hear Jeff say something, but I dropped last week just as I was getting into the Bronze and Iron Age invasions. And I was going to pick it up there, but actually it's not that important to pick it up there because that's sort of the beginning of half, the first part of these stories, and it comes in later on in this chapter. So I'm looking at I think it's chapter 7 out of the Evolution of Civilizations today. I'm going to do something a little bit weird. I'm going to start at the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I mean the beginning. So I kind of have been looking at the way in which these great steps in time have been made. And I always struggle to place things and to understand what the relationship of time and the amount of time that's happening over. And I thought it might be useful because I'm actually going to come back to quite a lot of these things at some point. There's lots of really interesting things to say for, I think, Iron Age Archive purposes, not just for my own interest, but like genuinely for Iron Age Archive purposes. I think each of these like periods that I'm going to talk about really quickly are interesting, and there's things to think about there in terms of the base that they lay, right? And everything that I'm going to give you an idea of very quickly is, layers of a pyramid. And we're standing at the pinnacle, but like I think often sometimes we don't have perspective on that pyramid. So, earliest...
By the way, sorry to put you on the spot, but do you subscribe to this carbon dating mainstream timeline? Or do you...
I had no reason not to. I think that I have nothing against young Earth creationists. I don't look down my nose at young Earth creationists in any way. I respect them, and I respect that position. I think that there's something that significant that happens 6,000 years ago, and I think my view is that there's actually two universes. There's an old universe and a young universe. And the young universe gets spliced into the new universe, and it's called hypertime. There's a theologian who's developed this view. It's called
Interesting.
Hypertime. So, but yeah, it doesn't just if you don't buy us, fine. I respect that. So 13.7 billion years ago, roughly, we get the Big Bang. BYA is billion years ago, MYA is million years ago, KYA is thousands of years ago. We get 2/3 of the way through the age of the universe, and then the sun forms, which is the third sun. It's the third star It's a third. It's thought to be a third generation star based upon the elements that are in there. And with that, the Earth begins. About 1 billion years later, life begins. We don't know how it begins. And I think after you ask the question of why is there something rather than nothing, the second most interesting question to ask is how did life begin? Now, I think God did it, but that's besides the point. It's just it's whatever your answer is. I think that's the second most interesting question anyone can ever ask. 1 billion years now, life begins. What is that? That's very simple single-celled organisms. One of the most important leaps forward in history is that eukaryotes, and a lot of people don't really clock into eukaryotes when they think about these like great steps. Eukaryotes, something happens, and one type of cellular single-cell organism absorbs another one, and it doesn't eat the other one; it just sort of embodies the other one, and this system of specialization begins where these two organisms start to act together, and that's what eukaryotes are. We're eukaryotes. Our cells have like two things going on. Our cells are not just simple cells. 2 billion years after that, you get multicellular organisms, and we're off to the races because things start to happen compared to the previous 13 billion years. Things start to happen very fast, and you have vertebrates not very long after multicellular organisms. So we have a spine, and then 100 and something years after that, million years after that, you get tetrapods, four-legged things with four appendages, and then you get mammals and dinosaurs 250 million years ago. They arise at the same time, right? 50 to 60 million years ago, you get primates. 35 to 40 years ago, out of primates comes monkeys and apes, as opposed to like lemurs, like more primitive types of primates. 25 to 30 million years ago, apes separate from the monkeys, or at least the common ancestor. These are all common ancestors. And then 16 to 19 million years ago, you get great apes. 12 to 15 million years ago, you get African apes, so like orangutans separate out there. And then 9 to 11 million years ago, you get chimpanzees and humans. And then finally, the common ancestor. And then 5 to 8 million years ago, humans split off from chimps. And really, some people might criticize me, but I'm calling that the beginning of the Paleolithic. The Paleolithic is when humans are around. Now, actually, though, for a long time, at least in the human story, not the universal story, not a lot happens. And it's only about 130,000 years ago that we come out of Africa. There are already populations that have moved out of Africa, but these are sort of our ancestors. They wipe everybody out. They absorb a little bit of the genetics of other groups, but they wipe out a lot of people. And but the real leap forward starts to happen 50 to 60,000 years ago. There's a gene that develops called FOXP2, and FOXP2 significantly mutates 50,000 years ago. I think I'm right about this, right? I might be wrong. FOXP2 mutates about 50,000 years ago, and FOXP2 allows you to is very tied up with language, and it's very much wrapped up in one's ability to convey complex or abstract thoughts and in language, and to be able to understand complex and abstract thoughts. 20,000 years ago, the Mesolithic begins, and the Mesolithic is very primitive villages, but things are starting to happen. And this Mesolithic and Neolithic timelines, they begin and end at different times in different places. And I'm giving you the beginnings in the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent. And then 10,000 years ago, the Neolithic begins.
Last week when you were talking about round heads and long heads, which time period was that?
That's Mesolithic, Neolithic. So to
And that was the beginning of agriculture as well.
The Neolithic is the beginning of agriculture. There's something called the Neolithic Revolution, and that's when agriculture really explodes. And then 8,000 years ago, 6,000 BC, Mesopotamian mixture begins. Now, really quick reminder, these are the 7 stages of civilization for Quigley: mixture, gestation, expansion, conflict, universal empire, decay, invasion. And the Mesopotamian civilization lasts for roughly 5,700 years, which is amazing, right? That's a long time. If we are closer to the death of Mesopotamian civilization, according to Quigley, than the people who were at its death were to its beginning. They lasted a really, really long time. And they lasted 3/4 of what we would define as the age of civilization. Any questions on the timeline? If you've got them, I'm going to be trying to move a bit fast. But I'm curious as to around when does Bucklander think Atlantis was built, populated? I'm not trying to fit Atlantis into this timeline. I'm working with conventional timelines. I'm very happy to throw that out the window and start to do other things. And I might do a schizo one in a couple of weeks, which is about off of a book that a guy wrote saying Atlantis is 100,000 years old and it was built by Neanderthals. So Atlantis was the Neanderthal civilization. And I kind of have started to think, I wonder if Neanderthals are who God wipes out with the flood or something like that, or if that doesn't if the Neanderthal isn't what is wiped out. And there's a few other books. One is a book about Neanderthal predation. I'm so glad you asked that, Sensible Zoomer. That is in these slides. Before I tell you about Göbekli Tepe, though, this is Mesopotamia. This is what we're dealing with. This is, you can also, so it's the Fertile Crescent, right? This up here is known as the Syrian Saddle. People pass through here. It's a big corridor for exchange. This is Mesopotamia proper. Sumeria is down here. These two big rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates. And Göbekli Tepe is right up here. I'm going to come back to that. And this is, of course, the Levant. So Göbekli Tepe is up there. Now, what happens in all of this? Well, you have hunter-gatherers, right, coming down these valleys from the north, up in these hills, starting to trickle down. And also, you get both roundheads and longheads, right, coming down. In fact, I'm suspicious that the roundhead longhead thing, which again I don't know if it still holds, but I think Quigley's suggesting that Mesopotamia was potentially a roundhead civilization that gets sort of taken over by longheads. What happens though is the quick story of Mesopotamia is people creep down the valleys. They sort of do, as soil wears out, they move further down, and eventually they find themselves in a part of the world where there's floods, and the floods are really good because the floods revitalize the soil every flood season. And somebody realizes, oh, these floods are predictable, and I can start telling people when the floods are. And these are the guys, and they also start to realize that, oh, the flood is in relation to the sun. And I can then look at the sun and be able to predict when a flood is going to come, because it's based upon the time of the year. And these become the priests. Why I've subtitled this the Rise of the Astrologer-Priests. And they then design a sort of civilization around this knowledge and what this knowledge unlocks, which is an incredibly a surplus of food that they're able to put away. Quigley says that civilizations need instruments of expansion, and the instrument of expansion culturally was the priests' religion, who are using their knowledge to increase the amount of food produced by the peasants. They're charging the peasants for this information, but they're also reinvesting that surplus back into the production of food. And this capital reinvestment is very important for the Age of Expansion. One of the interesting things when we look at the timeline here, just to mention very briefly, is in that Age of Expansion in 4500 to 2500 BC, around 3600 BC, in the soil record is a layer of mud, which is 8 to 14 feet thick in different places. And the thought is that this is, at least by some, right, that this epic flood is what inspired the narrative of the global flood. So as I say, the knowledge of this flooding comes to be used both for agricultural and civil purposes, right? Making these plans. And so these priests are really more scholars, and they are like keeping records of the skies, both day and night, and they're very committed to learning. They're very committed to these sort of cultivation. I have a picture of them down here. I'm giving a very quick overview before I get to Göbekli Tepe, though. This is the very quick version of Mesopotamia. They by 3000 BC, the Sumerian priestly class is in control. They have an ability to predict these floods, and a feedback cycle happens with the surplus that they're getting. They're using it to reinvest, and they become the instrument of expansion. But eventually, what happens to all instruments, Quigley says in his model, is they become institutions, and institutions become rigid, and they are no longer focused on expansion. They sort of become for the comfort and status of the people that come to rule them. And they become a closed group. The priests sort of control who comes in. They have an incredible amount of wealth, and they have transitioned by the Age of Expansion to a male sun sky god, away from a lunar sort of female god, and they've got a huge amount of control over the civilization. That is the basic what you need to know in a single 5-minute thing about what Mesopotamia was. Now, why? Now, okay. So these hunter-gatherers. One of the things I want to point out is, in terms of the rise of civilizations, the most stable place for civilizations to arise are on the borders of 3 or more environments, 3 or more ecological areas, because it produces a robust response to droughts and famines. If you are hunter-gatherers tend to live in monoculture areas, so where something goes bad, they're very, very at risk. villages, basic cultures with a little bit more going on tend to live on the border of two or more environments, and civilizations tend to emerge on the border of three or more environments meeting together. And usually one's the sea, usually something's river based, and the third will be, it could be the desert. Don't think that the desert is not a place that can support life. We just would do terribly there. So these hunter-gatherers are, and one of the ways that you can call what I've described as mosaics. Civilizations thrive in environmental mosaics, and this part of the world has a lot of these mosaics going on. It has rivers, it has swamps, it has floodplains, it has the sea, it has desert. There's a lot here. There's a lot of different sources that you can turn to. Now, up here, I took a little screenshot so you can know exactly where Göbekli Tepe is. It's right at the top of the Fertile Crescent, where the Fertile Crescent sort of peaks. What's Göbekli Tepe? Why am I telling you about this? Well, it's not actually Mesopotamian, I don't think. I don't think you can really classify it as Mesopotamian. You might. But what Göbekli Tepe is a temple, and it's about 12,000 years old, if I remember correctly. And but what is significant about Göbekli Tepe is there's this thought that civilization starts first, and then religion comes. And actually, Göbekli Tepe appears to be a religious site that civilization formed around. Basic civilization. I'm not using it in Quigley's sense, but basic, slightly advanced cultures starting to form around it. So actually, religion precedes civilization, it seems like. And I actually think that makes a lot of sense in the narrative Quigley gives us about the Sumerian priests, and how civilization starts largely because they're there for civilization to cohere around. Now, there is a guy named V. Gordon Childe, who's an Australian archaeologist, and he comes up with these criteria for these 10 criteria for what civilization is. And I forgot to write this down. Give me 1 second. Let me just look this up. If there's any questions, now's a good time.
I've also heard something similar where religious sites, before, when people were nomadic, they would kind of do cycles around this area and set up religious sites. And eventually those religious sites became so frequented that they became villages, and people started to settle there.
Yeah. It's quite a significant leap to settle down, because you're investing in this place. You're sort of saying, like, there's something here that I'm prepared to, like, stop and develop this area. I think having that religious aspect is the prime motivator. I can't remember how I put it to my friend the other day, but that it sort of suggests. I can't remember. I put it really nicely, and I don't remember. I can't find the V. Gordon Childe, the 10 markers. If somebody can Google that while I'm talking. But it's things like, they have a written language, they're settled down, there's a social hierarchy. If no one finds it today, I'll have it I'll put it up in next week. So Göbekli Tepe is very important, and it tells us something. Now, why? What? Okay, I'm gonna go back to this one. stage one, mixture. There's a couple of things that happen. You have according to Quigley, we have potentially three sources of people coming together in this area. You have a Semitic group, which brings, and Quigley does this via numbers. The number base for Mesopotamia is 60, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. We have 6 groups of 60 in a circle, 360 degrees. The Mesopotamians, if they could have, would have had a 360-day year. But what you get is, in this 60 number base, Quigley says, is a weird sort of combination of number base 10 and number base 12, and potentially number base 20. That is, you have systems where after 10 you start over, or after 12 you start over, or after 20 you start over. He says that the 10 is a Semitic influence. The 12 is the Highland Garden people influence, the Neolithic influence. And you have a primitive influence coming somewhere from the south. He doesn't say where, he just says southern influence, tropical forest origin. Now, why do we want to say tropical forest origin? Part of the reason we want to say that, I think it's Asia, actually, now that I'm saying it. There's some movement back up out of Asia. Because Mesopotamia has pigs and chickens. And pigs and chickens are domesticated animals that start in Asian tropical forests. So it's thought that they were brought up, and with that, some primitive stuff going on. Now, at the beginning, the moon is at the center of early cultures. I talked last time about how, feminine moon, masculine sun, depending upon what was more important to you, you might have a masculine moon and a feminine sun. I talked about it last time. If you're interested and you haven't seen it, but it's easier for early peoples to use the moon for timekeeping, because there's a 28.5-day cycle or 29.5-day cycle, and I got my notes here. Early patriarchal hunters will see the moon as male because they're still using the moon for timekeeping. So the moon's more important to them than the sun. And because they're patriarchal, they're going to see it as male. For women, for early matriarchal gatherers, gardeners, the hill people clearly talks about, they're going to see the moon as female and see the sun as her consort. And likewise, for the patriarchal, they're going to see the sun as the moon's wife. But one of the influences that comes in with the Semites is they bring this idea of there's a male moon who they call Sin. I don't know if there's any connection there with the word sin or not. And they call his consort, the female sun, Shepash or Shepesh. The Highland Garden people have a Mother Earth goddess, and they kind of begin to put away the moon, and they make the female the Earth, and the male sun as her consort again. But males come to dominate Mesopotamia, which is basically a prerequisite for civilization. If you want to know more about that, watch the de Juvenel video. De Juvenel outlines this, and I summarize that there. That really, it's men breaking away from the longhouse that are the key to civilization. Longhouse, if you don't know, being the sort of shorthand for primitive female-dominated consensus mentality that we're being infected with again. So the sun becomes dominant again for the floods. and the men, the male priests in charge, reorient themselves towards the sun. Quigley says the whole moon, sun, earth, male, female, goddess thing is all over the place in Mesopotamia because of these shifts that happen. It's hard to chart. So if I say things that I immediately contradict myself with, that's why. It's a little bit all over the place. The sun god grows in importance as the Earth Mother declines, but it gets confused by these Semitic influences. Now, I'll go to this slide for the time being. Stage 2, okay, so mixture, more than one group has to come together because they have to learn that there's more than one way of living. And that's why a number of civilizational theorists say you need two or more groups cultures coming together to form a civilization. A single culture can't produce a civilization. So that's what happens in mixture. These groups, these Semites and these Neolithic gardeners and potentially a southern influence coming together. And that happens from 5,000 to 6,000 to 5,000 BC. From about 5,000 to 4,500 BC, you have gestation. And nothing ever really looks like it's happening in gestation. But the civilizational forms and like paradigm are forming in this period. You have the development of dairy as a food source. You have, which comes from not hunter-gatherers, quickly suggesting here, but these Neolithic garden people. They're moving south, using up the land, and they get to grasslands. And I think rather than keeping for meat animals, they realize we can keep these animals for dairy. So they kind of converge on the same spot as some of these hunters, pastoral peoples, but from a different angle. Women get less important, men get more important, and the herders, again, start to turn towards the sky. And the interesting thing that comes out of this male sky god versus female earth goddess is the concept of the female earth is tied up with the idea of fertility, and the male whereas the male sky god is tied up with virility, the potency. Like one is potent and one is the ability to foster and develop and grow. And it's much more action oriented and much less passive. There's a bunch of really sort of fairly complex things happening here that would take a really long time to get into, but that fertility can be captured in those sort of like those what am I thinking of? Those statues of like feminine figures. The most famous is the Venus of Willendorf, which is about 2,500 years old. I'm just bringing it up now. If you've seen the Young Pope, you might know it from the Young Pope. Here we go. And ironically, I know a guy who makes these out of butter. Weirdly, I'm just bringing it up now. Here we go. This is a recreation, but you can you see what that is, right? Like this is a fat woman. Healthy fat women like this are associated with the ability to bear children. So this is a really important sort of symbol. And for the male sky god, the symbol becomes the bull. And I haven't seen anything here, but you might know the story of Europa and the bull. I suspect that there's symbolic thing that's wrapped up in that story. We'll talk more about that. I might come back to that in the classical civilization chapter. So yeah, and the other thing that comes with this is the coming of the sun is represents like the time of crops. He's impregnating the earth, who can keep the crops, but she can grow the crops, but she needs to be impregnated. And the sun is the thing that comes and gives her that ability to grow the crops. And and as the sun starts to go down, as the year progresses, it comes with the concept of dying. And further to this, this then drifts again into the sun becomes a bull and the earth becomes a cow. And with this, one of the most important sort of symbols for Mesopotamia is the rod inserted into the earth. The phallic symbol of the rod penetrating, creating fertility, and Quigley says that in Egypt, at least, this goes through the eventually culminates. This rod in earth culminates in the pyramid. That's what the symbol there is. Quigley's not going to say what Spengler says, that there's some sort of like civilizational symbol that all civilizations like adhere to their own symbols, but there is still a lot of like imagery and recurring themes and symbolism going on. He says that the triangle becomes feminine and the rod becomes male. And if you just picture in your head a triangle, he says that these get combined together with a triangle on top of a stick, which he says sort of symbolizes the axe and represents power. So the suggestion he's sort of hinting at here is, as cultures learn to balance these two forces, they become powerful. The axe, and they turn to the axe as a sort of symbol of this. And then there's yet another step in all of this, whereby the Earth Mother Goddess ends up. Sorry about my chair again. Gets paired with a dying god. Eventually, the symbolism comes on with the sun going down in the winter. He's the dying god, and I forgot to look this up, but there's a lot of symbolism that is wrapped up in the medieval Europe, with the Fisher King, and the Fisher King being this impotent old male king who is like waiting for rejuvenation. He often has like a wound in his thigh, but he's like waiting for rejuvenation, or he's waiting for a successor. So there's the Fisher King points to that older symbolism, and I just want to read out here. Excuse me. Look at this. Babylonian Ishtar had a consort, Tammuz. Egyptian Isis had Osiris. Syrian Astarte had her son Aden. Anatolian Cybele had a son Attis. The Cretan Rhea had a son Zeus, who became confused in character and name with the pastoral sky god of the northern flatlands. In Greece and Rome, where Indo-European ideas were powerful, there was considerable confusion of these ideas. The sexual aspect became separated from the vegetation aspect, one being associated with Aphrodite or Venus and her lover Adonis, while the other was associated with Demeter or Ceres. In Greece, the old Oriental legend of the dying god became the familiar story of Demeter and her daughter Persephone, whose annual visit to Hades caused the death of vegetation in the summer season. So this is the sort of the symbolism that's getting generated and fermented in this period of gestation. The priests develop in this period of 6,000 to 4,500 BC, stages 1 and 2, and by 4,500 BC, they're probably like off to the races, and that's what you see here in these two pictures I have here. There's a number of technologies going on in the left. You practically have all of them. You have the domestication of animals. You have the plow. you have irrigation, you have mud bricks, you have pottery, you have the kiln, you have the wheel on the cart up there, and in the background you have fishing boats, and you have the ziggurat. This is, in many ways, until the last like 400 or 500 years, this is one of the most inventive periods in human life in all of this story. What you don't see here is writing. Here I have a sample of Akkadian. It's actually quite versatile. This is significantly more useful and advanced than the Egyptian hieroglyphics, because those symbols are much more rigid in their usage, whereas this is phonetic, which is very, very useful in the development of ease of use of language. And the easier something is to use, the more it will get used. Yeah. So just to read it off: plow, wheeled carts, draft animals, bricks, the arch, city life, potter's wheel, industrialized pottery economy, copper, bronze smelting, a distant trade, sailboats, writing, the elaborate number system, the ability to put numbers in position in ones, whatever the equivalent of tens is, whatever the equivalent of hundreds is. The Romans didn't do that. The Romans did not have the ability, had not invented positional notation, which is really, again, important for the ease of use of numbers. Something easier, it'll get used more. Major advances in astronomy, less so in medicine, but some really significant changes in religious and social life in this time as well. This is the ziggurat. Quigley says that what the ziggurat is an artificial mountain, and so this is why this reflects the hill origin of the hill, the garden people. They're living in the hills, and they come down from the hills and they make a hill for their god to live on, and that's what this is. The metal is really important. They drive trade networks. I've talked about the number system, positional notation. Great. Now, one of the really interesting things that Quigley says about going back, I might as well look at this. This is just some filler. I think this is particularly beautiful, but the astrological system that develops is not science. Quigley says it's empirical. It's not science. What I take Quigley to mean by this is, he says I think what he's saying is they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know how to model it. They were not saying coming up with explanations that we would come up with in what we would consider science, what Quigley is talking about as science. Rather, they just keep immaculate records and they number crunch, and they just get really good at statistically saying an eclipse is going to happen today. And it's not because they understand it. They're not generating scientific understanding or attempts at scientific understanding. They're just sort of getting better at law of averages. They develop a really accurate calendar off of this, but every 19 years they had to plonk in 7 months to fix the cycle. But by 2500 BC, just again changing pictures just because, by 2500 BC the expansion is slowing down. We don't know a lot about what's going on. There's not very good records. we know, as in events, we know these big, broad brushstroke stuff. And actually, that's sort of more useful for Quigley's description of civilizations. It's not actually super important, like what happens to this king on this day. It is more about the sort of grand process unfolding of these civilizations. They've sort of maxed out their ability to expand. If you look at going back to this map, they have occupied all of this and more. They have settlements down the Persian Gulf into even down towards Bahrain, on Bahrain, and so yeah. And one of the things that happens is as cultures move into the fourth age, the age of conflict, they become irrational. And so the priest sort of, even though he says it's not science, what happens is the priest science starts to get replaced by priest magic. So they become more magicians and less academics. And he makes a really quick reference saying that there are hints of democratic institutions here, but we don't know for certain. And I thought that was interesting. Now, the Age of Conflict begins around 2700 BC. You might note there's sometimes a bit of overlap, and Quigley says that's fine. The Age of Expansion for them goes to 2500 BC. The Age of Conflict starts 200 years earlier. That's fine. Quigley says that's to be expected. These are not hard dates. They're fuzzy. They represent trends. There's not much more, so I'll just keep going, and then if there are any questions, I'll deal with them afterwards. So expansion starts to slow around 2700 BC. It doesn't stop. Quigley said second imperialist wars, third class conflicts, and fourth irrationality. And he says you can see this with, in particularly with these guys, the imperialist wars and class conflicts, because what happens is there's more wars for imperial things because people are looking to seize their neighbors' stuff in order to grow rather than making things themselves. And what that does is it makes generals more important, which in turn creates a class conflict between generals and priests, and the generals sort of displace the priests. So the instrument of expansion gets bypassed. And there's only really two significant innovations in this period, that positional notation and aqueducts. And for 2,000 years, it's a series of imperialist wars. In 2350 BC, the Akkadians set up an empire within Mesopotamia, but they fall. The Babylonian Empire arises in 1700 BC. They fall. And what happens is during this time, the Akkadian and the Babylonian empires, they start to conflict with their two nearest civilizational neighbors. What I have up here now is the Hittite Empire. The Hittites, I don't think we know a lot about them, and I think Göbekli Tepe is more Hittite than it is Mesopotamian. I will check this, but I'm pretty sure we don't know a lot about the Hittites. And they don't last a very long time. They only last, what do I have here? Oh no, that's the Egyptians. They don't last long. They last like 700 years or 1300 years. One of the things to say is in this model of stages, Quigley's quick sort of way of being able to tell who's going to win when civilizations fight each other, who's going to win. It's the civilization that is closest to the age of expansion. So a civilization that is in its age of expansion will beat a civilization that's in its universal empire. Universal empires are not productive. They have the appearance, the facade of being productive, because they build big things, but those big things are not productive. The centralization is actually not that useful for them. They lose their vitality, right? This is how, fractious Europe can go out and conquer the rest of the world, because they're in their age of expansion when nobody else is. And when they're in their age of expansion, they have access to the rest of the world in the way that the rest of the world, these other civilizations, didn't have in their ages of expansion. So that's how Quigley accounts for this spread. This is a Hittite gateway. It's fairly well known. I can't remember where it's from, but those lions are very stylized in a way that the Lion of Babylonia, which is what this is not stylized. The other great competitor that Mesopotamia has, and I say Mesopotamia, I'm not talking about the empires. I'm not talking about the empires that arise in Mesopotamia. Civilizations are not empires, and empires are not civilizations. Sometimes they line up, and the other third great civilization happens to be one in which empire and civilization are the same. Now, this is Egypt, of course, and this is sort of what the pyramids would have looked like. They were smooth. What we see today on the pyramids of Giza is because the Arabs just came along and stripped all of the surface stone. Cairo is built out of this, the facade layer of stones that the pyramids are built out of. And what they're fighting for, what these three empires are fighting one another for, is this Levant and the Syrian saddle. The Syrian saddle is the prize, but it's also an incredible tool in and of itself. It unlocks access to lumber, and it serves as a link between East and West for trade. And once you have it, you can impose tribute on the Mediterranean coast there. And it changes, the various Mesopotamian empires are changing, and they're fighting the Egyptians and Hittites. And, the Hittites are from 2000 BC to 1300 BC. And eventually the Mesopotamian empires win out. And if you take a look at this, we can see there's a lot of strong parallels between Mesopotamia and Egypt. A lot of these dates line up fairly closely. Mesopotamia's are, older by about 500 years, so it's going. All of its events are a little bit earlier than Egypt, but and when it goes into decay, it doesn't go into quite as deep a decay. So if you look there, the Universal Empire, Egypt unifies into a Universal Empire. It's always been unified, but it enters into that stage around 1550 BC, which is why Mesopotamia can beat it, because Mesopotamia doesn't go into its Universal Empire until 750 BC. That empire is the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans are a Semitic people. They are then replaced by the Persians. This is the greatest extent of the Persians. yeah, and the Assyrians emerge. The Assyrians emerge. The Assyrians are replaced by the Chaldeans, and then the Chaldeans are from 612 BC to 538 BC, and then eventually they're replaced in 538 by the Persians. Now, one of the interesting things that benefits Mesopotamian civilization from this rather like tumultuous switching of empires is they're currently being renewed. The baseline empire is still, the baseline civilization is still there, but it's kind of being regenerated by these civilizations. There's I think it's Persepolis. But you can see here the Age of Decay happens around 450. The Age of Decay is when basically the civilization is now just waiting for someone to come along and conquer it. Some civilizations don't make it to decay. Some civilizations don't go through these steps. They get interrupted by us, the Western civilization. You know, the Aztec and the Inca, they don't go through these same steps. But by 350, both Egypt and Mesopotamia are in decay, and it's 350 to 300 that they suffer this last stage invasion, which of course is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great topples over both the Persians that are leading Mesopotamia and the Egyptians. And that is chapter 7 of The Evolution of Civilizations. I really like this one. I really enjoy the art of these people. Some of it's a little bit haunting, but I quite like it. But that's what I got, and it's a little bit behind schedule, but yeah. If there are any questions. Jeff has gone. Okay, yeah, it's time for book club. If you do have questions, let me know. But next week, it is the chapter on the Canaanite and Minoan civilizations. Quigley smashes these two together because these little chapters are the civilizations that feed into the Western civilization. So Mesopotamia feeds in via the Canaanite civilization, and Minoan feeds in through the classical civilization. So that's next week. So it'll be two little mini civilizations. Not mini in terms of their significance, but mini in terms of the pages Quigley devotes to them. And then after that, it's classical civilization. And then it's, I believe, it's just straight into Western civilization, which I'm going to do up into where Tragedy and Hope begins. It's a very interesting chapter that is not dealt with by Tragedy and Hope. But as I keep saying, I think the failure a lot of people who have dealt with Tragedy and Hope is that they have not considered it in light of the evolution of civilizations. I think this great big door that people keep bashing their heads against with Tragedy and Hope, that the evolution of the civilizations is the key to that door, and it means so much more. It's such a more valuable piece of information when you have the evolution of civilizations to go through. So I think it's that's why I'm doing this and not just something else on these Friday nights. So there's 3 more episodes of this to do on the evolution of civilizations, and I'll be starting to think about what to do after that. Next week, I think I'm trying to do Tuesdays, and I think Jeff is okay with that. So next Tuesday is the second to last episode of Tragedy and Hope, which is sort of about the Kennedy era, and then the book. That's the last. Chapter 19 is the last one that's like properly a history book, and chapter 20, then what'll be the last episode, is sort of forward looking. But right now, we're only 6 minutes behind schedule. Right now we got book club. We've been reading the Royalist Revolution. I don't know what we've got up next. I suggested to Jeff we do a little book on the Guelphs and Ghibellines. I don't know if he's decided to do that. If you're interested in that, there's just one. I'll just deal with that question. Sensible Zoomer, the only civilization that has been able to reverse the process is the West, and we've done it 3 times. And Quigley thinks we're at our 4th chance to go back and start over in the Age of Expansion, which is what Tragedy and Hope is. The hope is the tragedy is the the 3rd Age of Conflict, and the hope is the 4th Age of Expansion. So yeah, if you're interested in any of this stuff, if you're interested in book club, if you're interested in Quigley, if you're interested in the technocracy or any of that stuff, be sure to get on the Discord, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that you know that these things are happening. Trying to get a bit more regular with these things, but it's always good to be plugged into these things so that you get the alerts when I'm going live, when Jeff and I are going live, and yeah, or that you know that we've done one. So yeah, and that's that. And I'm just gonna play us out, and I'm gonna play the one that I had from last time that I didn't tell Renegade what it was. I left. And I forgot to tell. I forgot to mention what it is. It's a great. It's like one of the greatest video game songs ever, and it's from a Game Boy Color game called Jimmy White's Cue Ball. Jimmy White is a British billiards player, as we say, but it's a great. It's a great song. Thanks for coming, guys, and hopefully see you Tuesday or this time on next Friday.